four issues on the table that we have considered today. Okay, the ASUU strike being called off,
Nnamdi
Kanu being discharged and acquitted, the Supreme Court having a new Chief Justice of Nigeria properly inaugurated. A lucky week for him, in which he also got a national honor, and also crude oil theft, which Mr. Dankunle has just addressed. So let's reflect on these four issues and see how it goes. Yemi Adamolekun, let me start with you. ASUU, since you are a university child.
Quite. I think it's really quite sad because unless I missed a fine print in the agreement, ASUU has gone back to work after downing tools 8 months ago with nothing. I'm not aware that any money was dispersed. I'm sure I understand promises were made. I understand the speaker promised that I think 400 and something billion will be put in the budget and passed for next year's budget. That is yet to be seen. But in as much as ASUU was trying to save, quote and unquote, public tertiary education in Nigeria, I'm not quite sure at what cost they think is too high or too low. 8 months that students have sat at home and done nothing. And at the end of it, they basically have nothing to show for it. I mean, Mr. Ogunye was making the finer points of the law that even the process that the federal government went through also showed that they were not really serious, that before they had gone to court, there were several other steps they could have taken, but they wasted so much time because they didn't prioritize it. And so for me, again, as I keep saying, I understand that for ASUU, it's an ideological issue around public funding of tertiary education. But I would dare say really that if we also want the quality of education that we want, there's no way the federal government can fund all the university it has created, some of them that it should not have created in the first place, 100%. So where are we having a conversation around actually what it means to fund quality tertiary education in Nigeria? If the federal government, or the government, let me not say federal government, if the government funds primary and secondary, where every Nigerian child has a basic education that makes them functional, they can read and write, they can do simple mathematics, understand history, understand civics, and they are a functional member of society, that's the basic minimum that all of us should be fighting for. Tertiary education is another level. It's another level of expertise, it's another level of deeper education. And agreeing that every year government gives some money for infrastructure, gives bursaries to students, but there must be something that students pay to get the education that we want if we want to be competitive in the 21st century. And no, we are not a Scandinavian country. We have a country of 200 million people. Comparing ourselves to Norway and Finland of 20-odd million is really not productive. And the second one I think I'd really like to comment about is our leaking pipelines. I mean, you made the point about Tom Polo trying to justify his 4 billion. But I just find it quite, I'm not even sure of the words, that Tom Polo that probably should be, anyway, that it's taken, I think this is what I'll summarize it. As a friend of mine said, leave the oil for the people in the Niger Delta, it will stop being stolen. Let them give a cut to it to the federal government, everybody will be happy.
Federalism. Professor Awurawa, are you there? Professor David Awurawa, are you with us? Your thoughts? And then after you, I'll go quickly to Professor Kila, who has joined us from Kaduna.
Good afternoon, or is it evening now? Good evening, Dr. Abati. The ASUU strike has been called off, and we are all happy about that because, what we have said in the past 8 months has been how we can, what we can do, or what we could have done to ensure that the strike didn't drag for that long, but unfortunately it had to drag for 8 months. We are happy that the strike has been called off, and we are hoping that against the odds, this should be the strike to end all strikes. If that is what it becomes, we will be even more delighted. But I want to quickly add that the strike has been called off, but it is not yet Uhuru. Yemi has just mentioned the fact that only promises have been made. And after 8 months, all the government was able to do was to make promises. But everybody cannot stick to his own position tenaciously. Otherwise, we'll go nowhere. So it's good that as soon as we have shifted ground and we have decided to call off the strike. But our appeal will be that the government should do its own part so that they won't have any need for strike moving forward. If the government does not do its own part, I'm afraid, what we have achieved now, the going of the strike and this thing will just be transient. Transient because there is no way we can continue the way we are now. Infrastructure is so badly dilapidated that government just has to do something. And the pay of lecturers, Nigerian academics, is so small, the smallest in the world. That too cannot continue. Where we are is far less than the African average. In fact, it's just a quarter of the African average. And the giant of Africa cannot be there. In fact, academics, there's no way academics can be motivated to teach and do research with such paltry pay. So all our appeal is to government to take these things more seriously, do something to some extent, improve the condition such that we won't have cause to go on strike again. But it is disappointing. The president was supposed to speak on Tuesday. He hasn't spoken till now. He didn't speak until we call off the strike on Friday. He speaks to, how dismissive they are of higher education, of ASUU, and all that we stand for. And that is not how a country should be run. But we'll continue to appeal to government to do its own part so that our education system can keep up with the rest of the world and won't have cause to go on strike moving forward. For Nnamdi Kanu, yes, the court has ruled. The government should obey court judgment. But one of the things that influence our calling of our own strike is the judgment of the court. There is no way we can have a stable and lawful country if we select judgments we obey. If it does not favor us, we don't obey. If it favors us, we obey. No, it should not be like that. The government should obey the court's ruling. If he has anything else to file or moving forward, any other legal step to take, he can then go and take. Then for oil, we've said this several times, what the government needs to do. I agree only partly with Governor Rufai and Lamido Sanusi. And that is because they have spoken without consciousness for the history of how we have arrived at where we are now. Under President Goodluck Jonathan, and Sanusi confirmed that, our average oil export was over 2 million, about 2.2 or so. Sometimes we even got up to 2.4 million barrels a day. How do you arrive at the position now that we are not even able to export 1 million barrels per day? It speaks to how much the oil sector too has been abandoned, not enough attention has been paid, and we're where we are now. And as for NNPC not being able to remit money, it has a history. El-Rufai was among those who said in 2013-2014 that there was no subsidy. And in the 2016 budget, there was indeed no subsidy provided for. But we're buying petroleum products at a price less than the international price. Much later, NNPC said, the government said, NNPC has been the one bankrolling it. And of course, the money has to come from somewhere. NNPC now came to say, okay, we cannot remit money again to the federal government on account of that. So there is no need to speak in generalities. The specific is that subsidy will have to be addressed.
Okay.
They have to address it, and immediately too. Okay. Only then, an attention paid to stopping the oil theft, can we begin to, get the benefit from oil and, of course, indeed, gas as well.
Okay, thank you, Professor Awurawa. Let me go quickly to Professor Kila, who I understand is in Kaduna at the Kaduna Investment Summit, and who probably was there when Governor Nasir Rufai said, look, government has no business in oil and gas. Government should get out, privatize NNPC. And, what are your thoughts, Professor Anthony Kila?
Where do we start from? Do we start from the oil and gas? But I agree with what Governor Rufai says. Or rather still, I'm glad to see Governor Rufai finally agree with some of us over this issue. Because this is not a new discovery. It has been said a long time about how to reform and better manage the oil and gas sector. I think that is a crucial point. You throw a jab at Tombolo there, yes, he's doing a lot of work because he wants to prove people like me wrong, that they have no business monitoring tests and for such an amount. I think it's trying to prove us that their business and the salary is being paid or the emolument is being paid is working. I also think rather than turn this into a complicated issue, I agree with the writing on the right news, which calls it oil test. It's a simple test and it should be treated that way. The problem we have, I think, is that we have a conspiracy of elite and institutional powers involved in these grand national tests. Therefore, we need a radical approach into dealing with this. There is an elephant in the room, which is oil subsidy, or better still, the removal of oil subsidy. We have a bit of a problem there because the present administration lacks the moral authority to deal with oil subsidy. Because part of its claim to fame is that saying there is no subsidy and the rest of the world was lying. Some people bought into that as well. So there's a problem there. I hope somebody would, instead of instituting new things, find a way to simplify it and understand that every step we should try to produce and we should try to add value. We should try to refine. We need more refineries and we need a mindset to try to get more value from sort of natural resources, as we say, we have in the country. Then there was about the cost, about the CPN. You were trying to get into something, Dr. Bati, with Dito Guye, about what should be the way forward with CPN. I think 5 things. Number one, you should set out a manifesto that will be treated like a contract that is confident between team and colleagues and the rest of Nigeria. That manifesto, that covenant, that pact, that contract we want to do, will include something that restores the independence and authority of the judiciary. An independence that must be financial and administrative. And I agree there with Jeffrey. And you should start from seeing what went wrong without going to the end. If you want to restore authority, you must be able to keep your own house in order. So we should do that. But then you should reform the judiciary in a way that is independent, decentralized, and faster. If digitalizing is possible, a very big welcome to that. So that is a crucial thing. On to ASUU, I don't know what to say about ASUU because I have a bit of a problem. A part of me, I'm very pleased that students are going back to school. But I am concerned and disappointed with government and the academic leaders. The government, because at some point, rather than solving the problem, they resorted to fighting ASUU. They resorted to blackmail, they resorted to ostracizing them, they resorted to sabotaging them, calling them names. They became a very critical petty play of leadership, which was not good at all. Terrible optics. ASUU itself, after 8 months of holding students at home, and that is bad enough, but there are also a lot of allied businesses through the strike. After 8 months of closing businesses, holding students at home, and new students being unsure of their resumption and their whole life, what does ASUU take away from it exactly? I'm not saying they should go back to the strike. What I'm saying is that in strategic thinking, perhaps they should have stopped the strike if this is all they can do. Perhaps they didn't need to go to this long war if this is going to be the result at some point. I think leaders of ASUU need to sit down. Whilst I share their principles, I think they need to sit down and rethink how to manage relationship with government, money, and administration of the academia. I stop there.
Well, Professor Akintenwa, you are here listening to all of this. ASUU I have no doubt it's important to you. The other issues as well. Your turn to intervene.
On ASUU, GT Ogunye made a number of interesting points, and I agree with him essentially. But on the issue of the question you specifically asked him, you did ask GT Ogunye whether he intended to say that the appeal court try to consider public interest in arriving at their judgment, at their decision. And the explanation actually given, the response actually given by GT Ogunye clearly point to the fact that true enough, the court decided based on public interest. And the explanation is not far-fetched. GT Ogunye gave us the procedure required by the Trade Dispute Act, which stipulates that, well, if you are unable to deal with an existing dispute within the 7 days
Collective bargaining,
then the next thing you go to the mediation level. The principle of mediation is so clear in law. If you still fail, you go to conciliation. Where conciliation does not also work, you go to arbitration. But the next stage, the next bus stop, which is that of actually going through the panel, the federal government didn't do that, just jumped to the court directly. Now, it is expected that the court, in the thinking of many observers, and particularly the lawyers of ASUU, now, because that aspect, jumping the procedure, the line, that was why they now said, raise the issue of jurisdiction of the court. So I think that from this perspective, the answer to your question is that it can be rightly argued that the appeal court considered the rule of law, but also the public interest in this particular case. On Kanu, GT also explained to him the meaning of incompetent charges, and trying to say that actually, when talking about incompetent charges, we are also raising, the incompetence of those who brought the charges to the court. And the way he explained this is to say that, look, the office of the Attorney General of the Federation cannot just be likened to an ordinary court or an office. It's a place where it has become the terra cognita of the most sagacious minds in this particular case. So if, for instance, the office of the Attorney General will just go to the court, ill-prepared, etc. along, that there's a problem there. But I think, from my own perspective, is that, look, it is not, I repeat, it is not that we don't have very competent, these Oxford-trained, Ibadan-trained, Usuka-trained lawyers.
Calabar-trained?
Calabar, yes, of course, I'm even coming there. I know you attended Calabar University as well.
I'm just okay.
No, you see, they are all good and very competent. But the moment, for instance, you predicate political governance on truth, dishonesty, then what do? Your competence becomes nonsensical. That is the bitter truth. Now, for instance, when they brought these these arguments of terrorism, etc., it is most unfortunate. Most unfortunate. The framers, the government officials, they are at best very myopic in the analysis of the issue. Kanu has dual nationality, first of all, as a British citizen, as a Nigerian citizen. Nigeria, and I can tell you that, look, for God's sake, you cannot go as far as Britain and as far as Kenya to aggress the sovereignty of those countries. Who has actually forgotten that in 1984, the same Muhammadu Buhari, in an attempt to quote and unquote, extraordinarily render, Umaru Diko to Nigeria, the famous diplomatic baggage in international relations that we are always talking about. Buhari did that one when he was a military head of state. So in this case, if, for instance, the abduction, the rendition had taken place within the framework of Embassy of Nigeria, which is internationally considered as exterritorial, meaning that the laws of Nigeria can apply there. But by the time you arrest, you abduct someone outside of the embassy, please, this is more than an interference, it's more than an intervention. You did the same thing now in Kenya. And now, I think that at the end of the day, the impression being given by President Muhammadu Buhari is that his administration, whether it is military or civilian or presidential, he is simply saying that he has a terrorist approach to resolving political questions. And in terms of a solution, and particularly from the perspective of Ariwola, the new Chief Justice of Nigeria, I agree with the position of GT that, look, if, for instance, you are appealing to politicians to solve problems, what is the role of the judiciary itself in defending itself? So if they want to steal, why do you join them in stealing? If they want to compromise, why do you have to join them? You are the, are the crescendo. The ordinary people like us are looking forward to you. So why do you depend on the politicians? So if the politicians are not going to act, behave very well, then you deal with them decisively on the basis of law. So finally, I want to submit that all these issues of solutions, Tom Polo, finding, discovery, the means of, losing, oil theft, oil loss. Please, in Nigeria, political governance is based on truth. And for as long as we operate dishonesty, please, it's a waste of time.
Okay, Prof, on the Nnamdi Kanu case, some people say, well, what the court has done simply is to enforce its fundamental human rights. Nigeria being a signatory,
yes.
International conventions, covenants on terrorism, on extradition, cannot be allowed to violate the same protocols. And that the court has a responsibility to enforce the rights of all persons.
No, you are
but
right.
What they do with regard to the issues that the Office of the Attorney General says are subsisting for judicial determination, it's a matter for lawyers to fight out in the courts. But Yemi, you were going to say something about subsidy quickly, because I still want to take one more topic.
Quickly, I just wanted to speak to the point about appealing. ASUU appealing to the federal government, for me, still shows that they've learned no lesson from 20-odd years of continuous strikes with no result. It's an election year, and I've said this several times. We need to make funding education generally and funding tertiary education in particular an election issue. Appealing to a government where you strike for 8 months and you get nothing out of it simply just makes no sense, in my opinion. Secondly, on subsidy, just wanted to say to Professor Awurawa's point, and this is on the point on appealing, to your point, Professor Akinserenwa, on the judiciary appealing to politicians to behave themselves when literally they should decide how they want the judiciary to run. So if politicians choose not to behave themselves, then you have a responsibility to ensure that your sector runs as you would like it to run. And on subsidy, Professor Awurawa made the point that in 2013, 2014, Malame Rufai said there was no subsidy. No, the only person that said there was no subsidy is President Muhammadu Buhari, our current Minister of Petroleum, who has decided to remove subsidy from next year's budget. What was clear from the Occupy protest in 2012 was the fact that we there was a sense that the subsidy regime was a scam. So we're paying these huge amounts of money that's continued to increase over the last 10 years. And we're saying that you can't, the monies that you're paying is not for subsidy. It's being stolen. And you can't take that out on Nigerians. But as we have now found ourselves, the money has completely gone out of control. And the government, in whatever form it's not, has refused to curb it in addition to what is being stolen. And that's where we found ourselves.
Well, let's close that with the comments of Zainab Ahmed, the Minister of Finance and Budget Planning, who says if you sustain subsidy next year and you don't cut it off, Nigerians will pay about 7.6 trillion
only
as subsidy, and there will be no provision if you stretch it further for capital projects.
Yep.
But some members of the Senate of the Federal Republic of Nigeria are saying, no, if you remove subsidy by May 29, you will be derailing the new administration that will emerge. And they are saying, let's leave it till 2020. So
2024, you mean?
No, till the end of 2023, December. So we are between the... what did they say? The deep blue sea
it's what
and the dark place.
Professor Akintari said it's predicated on dishonesty. That's another classic example of that.
We'll see how that plays out.
Yeah.
But very quickly, let's take this topic as we begin to close the program today. The British Chancellor of the Exchequer, or the former, as it were, former finance minister, was this past week sacked by Prime Minister Liz Truss, following market turmoil over his mini budget. Kwasi Kwarteng cut short a visit to Washington, D.C., where he was attending talks with the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. Here, and the Prime Minister have been under mounting pressure to reverse some of their tax-cutting measures, due to be funded through massive government borrowing. Well, Kwasi Kwarteng, before that incident occurred, was saying that he was not going anywhere. But he had to cut short his trip to the IMF World Bank annual summit, only to be handed a sack. Is he a scapegoat? Was his sack inevitable? And would Liz Truss, the architect of Trussonomics, survive beyond Tuesday, when next she shows up in the House of Commons for Prime Minister's question time? Let me come to you, Professor Kila. You used to teach in the UK. What do you think of Trussonomics and what has happened to Kwasi Kwarteng, who boasted that it's going nowhere and who is now back to the backbenches?
One thing on the Council of State, I don't think they're set with our name, so I think we will actually consider it a dream that we was there and just quickly or a tour of that position. It's not much of a surprise because they took a gamble, which some saw was going on the wrong side. And in a country like the UK, in a situation with strong parliamentarian system, the leader cannot be seen not be doing anything. When you take a position and everything goes south totally, the first thing the least the leader can do is to be seen to be doing something. And in this case, a very good example of something is to get rid of the chancellor. It's a cynical, brutal move, but it has its own logic. And contrary to what people say, it's not the racial, I believe, scapegoatism. I think it could have happened to anybody. The chancellor became chancellor not because it was black or fat. Got there because he followed the path with the right connection and he shared ideology with friends. And it's just a political move. The Prime Minister herself is in trouble now. One, because the economy is bad. Two, because in a system of peers where you have trust among peers, not deferring followers to a leader, people request accountability every move you make. And every day, you have to justify your presence. There are people already thinking of taking everyone out of our position. And, she might save our position, but I will not be surprised if she doesn't do that. So, it's just one of the many possible things, the wonderful of the government parliamentary system.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Kila. Professor Awurawo, Kwasi Kwarteng is out. Will Liz Truss survive? Hello, Professor Awurawo. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, I was asking you about the chaos within the Conservative Party, within the cabinet, and Liz Truss doing a series of U-turns. Okay, Kwasi Kwarteng has become the scapegoat now. Will Liz Truss herself survive?
I don't think so. I doubt very much whether Liz Truss will survive. The adverse consequences of the tax cut, the extreme tax cuts on the economy, are so glaring and so disturbing to even both members of our party and Labour, and in fact, the United Kingdom at large, that I doubt if she will survive. But for Kwarteng, I feel very sorry for him because he has not been sacrificed on the altar of a failed policy. I think the problem really revolves around the extent to which Liz Truss and Kwarteng went in the tax cuts. They fail to understand that campaigns are done in poetry and governance is done in prose. They made those promises in the course of the campaign, but they also have come to the reality, when after they took power, such that the tax cut would not have been that extreme with such devastating consequences to the economy. Unfortunately, the economy is in tatters. Kwarteng is gone, and Liz Truss might be the next.
Okay, Professor Akintenawa, what do you think?
When you look at the letter of resignation or acceptance of sack, you discover that the problematic raised by Kwasi Kwarteng remains. Let me quote. He says, the situation in the UK, incredibly, I quote now, incredibly difficult. Rising global interest rates and energy prices, that was the situation when he was appointed. And that, I quote again, for too long, the country has been dogged by low growth rates and high taxation. That must still change if this country is to succeed. When you look at these statements in his letter, now scapegoating may be an issue, but the critical point there is that reduction of taxes, all right, the rich, now is not favorable to the poor. And they are now accusing him of accepting to have been used, all right, to address critical problems. I want to believe that, look, it can be accepted that he has been used as a scapegoat. The issue of his condoning, all right, white, quote and unquote, British superiority, quote and unquote, to the detriment of his blackness, quote and unquote, too, can be addressed within a different context. But more importantly, reference is always made to the book he co-authored with some 3 other people, in which it is argued that he said the British people are among the laziest people in the world. That one is generating controversy on its own. So his sack actually should be explained at different levels, not just on the basis of a mini budget that was put in place in September, either 23rd or 24th, that is generating controversy. So in this particular case, I think that we should just accept the situation as it is. Whether Liz Truss will be removed, only God knows.
Okay, Professor David Awurawa, I think you made a point about the cautionary tale of Trussonomics. I've always argued on this program, on this channel, that it is a cautionary tale. And you were quoting Mario Cuomo, who said, you campaign in poetry, you govern in prose. When you are campaigning, you make all the promises. You make everything possible. But when you are in government, you are faced with a stark reality. And we keep seeing this every day, and the veracity of that, statement, that quip by Mario Cuomo. Okay? Isn't that the point? And as it is, that's the lesson that Liz Truss and our former Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng, PhD economic history, are learning, unfortunately. He's back to the backbenches. What role will he play from the backbenches? Well, it's for us all to see. Thank you very much. You've been watching This Day Live, the Sunday talk show, here on Arise News. I'm Ruben Abati. From our entire team here in Lagos, it's bye for now, and thank you very much for watching. We'll see you again.